Cambodia is a beautiful and fertile country which has many exciting opportunities. And its inhabitants are a beautiful people with hopes and dreams. But the nation is also inflicted with many social problems. Corruption, civil unrest, poverty, child labour, and the social devastation of genocide. One of the most serious problems is the trafficking of young girls. How can this be? What could make a parent want to sell their child? How do people get away with stealing children and trafficking them? How is it that young girls become sex workers that are traded like common goods? Why is it that young girls see selling their bodies in exchange for sex as their only option to avoid starvation? How can the situation be reversed? And what is being done to solve the problem? Cambodia is still recovering after a brutal genocide where a quarter of the nation was killed. The dictator Pol Pot, leader of the Khmer Rouge, came to power in the mid-70s and ruled the country for 4 years. During that time, he was responsible for a massive ethnic cleansing operation. Intellectuals and other enemies of state who did not conform to his ideals and were deemed dangerous were systematically killed. Primary schools like this one were turned into prisons and torture camps which were run by cruelty. The Khmer Rouge planned to reinvent civilization and took up a new calendar which started on the day they took over. Their time in power did not last long, but was all the more devastating. The collapse of the health system, slave labour, and systematic executions cost more than 2 million people their lives. Garth Anthony worked for 8 years in Cambodia for the international Adventist relief organisation ADRA.
Pol Pot tried to destroy the family. So children were separated from parents, they were sent off to different camps, put in different work parties. Many of them never saw their parents or their children again. Their plan was to displace as many people as possible and upset the whole family structure. Anything that they could do, they destroyed. They got rid of the monetary system. They tried to go back to the bartering methods. They were trying to set up a very simple economy which left them in total control of the nation.
Those who were uneducated and did not know what was going on were driven away from the cities into the countryside. There they were made to labour on farms, oppressed and starved. people of all ages. The children were not spared.
Anyone who had any type of education or even appeared to have an education, for example, if they wore glasses, they were killed.
Those who did not obey or made the slightest complaint were executed without hesitation. Resignation, passivity, and obedience were necessary to survive. In 1979, the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia and got rid of the Khmer regime, but Pol Pot escaped justice and fled into the jungle, where he died of old age in 1998. A guerrilla war lasted for many years after the invasion, and the situation did not calm down until the late 90s. The Cambodian nation still has a long way to go before it can recover from the effects of these atrocities.
The genocide has left them with memories that have been burned into their consciousness, which they just don't want to know. They want to forget.
The genocide changed people's perceptions toward life in many ways, for example, in terms of child upbringing.
So I think in the psyche of the people, there is still this fear. Yes, it could happen again, therefore I better not love my children too much. If you don't love your children too much, then you won't be hurt if anything happens to them.
Today, about 14 million people live in Cambodia. The nation is very young. Half of the population is under 21 years of age. The genocide explains this bizarre age composition. A few generations are missing. The elderly do not have a proper education and are susceptible to health problems. The country's infrastructure and government are badly damaged. When we arrived, we realized, for example, that the welfare system is in ruins.
The welfare system hardly exists, as we would think about it anyway. Hospitals were very poor. The social services were very poor. Medicine, until in very recent years, was almost non-existent.
One of the consequences of this situation is that Cambodia has one of the highest recorded infant mortality rates. Far too few primary schools operate in Cambodia. A fifth of the nation is illiterate. The poverty is so great that the children have to work for their families from a very early age. Most of them have jobs of some sort. Thousands of them spend their days at rubbish dumps, rummaging around in deplorable conditions for half-useful objects instead of going to school. This is considered normal behavior. It's just something that children do.
Average salary, or average wage daily, is around $1 to $2 a day for 40% or more of the population. If a father is on $1 a day, and he is supposed to look after wife, 3, 4, 5 children, he can't do it. In order to survive, those children have to contribute to the family. But this is why you have so many children going early into prostitution. They roam the streets, they steal, they do get whatever they can in order to survive. They look on their lives as a hopeless situation, both the parents and the children. They see life as just one unending search for food, for affection, for whatever they want. And they usually can't get what they want. And so they live in hopelessness.
Every year, tens of thousands of Cambodian children are sold into slavery and prostitution.
Children can be sold, they can be kidnapped, they can be led almost willingly, or they can be abducted either by car, motorcycle, or whatever, some things like that, and then they disappear. Children have become somewhat of a commodity. They are looked on especially when people are in poverty, well, this is one way I can alleviate my situation. And there is a desire for making money which is built into some of these people like nothing else. We think the West is materialistic, but I think the East can beat us on that.
Poverty-stricken parents therefore look on their daughters as property, which they are prepared to sell like livestock. This is done for money or as trade-ins for goods. Some parents are even prepared to exchange their daughters for a satellite dish or a TV set. The boys are favourites with families, but the girls are less favoured. Jeffrey Bauman has for the past 15 years been an aid worker, working with victims of the slave and sex trades in Cambodia.
I have seen literally tens of thousands of girls over the years that have been trafficked in brothels, karaoke bars, beer gardens, all sorts of places.
A girl might charge $1, $2 a time for any man who comes along. If they are good looking, they can get more. It's the same for selling them on. When I first went to Cambodia, a girl could be sold, say, for $50, $100. By the time I left, it was $500, sometimes $1,000 if it was a good looking girl.
I have personally witnessed a young woman who was driving around a village I was visiting one day, tears in her eyes, crying for her daughter that had been stolen from her, and she never saw again.
The girls are either sold domestically or across the border to Thailand, Vietnam and China. It's estimated that around 800 girls are either sold or smuggled over the border to Thailand every month. 400 of them are caught and sent back by the Thai authorities. The others don't find their way home.
If they're living close to a border, children can disappear over the border very quickly, and the parent has no hope of getting them back.
There are many methods used to trick the girls and their relatives. Sometimes their families are assured that their daughters will get a job in a restaurant, a salon or a sewing company in the capital. They will get clean clothes, food, housing and even an education in exchange for their work. These are almost always blatant lies. The girls end up as sex slaves. Some of them end up like this, on display like meat in a supermarket. The difference is that here people are for sale. The families are sometimes promised a monthly sum of money. Many rural peasants that don't know any better are fooled by crooks and never see their children again. Some mothers are so overwhelmed by grief they can hardly speak. It's unfortunately true that many of the people involved in the child slave trade hold high positions in the community. Some of them wield considerable power. They are village leaders and even policemen.
When it comes to dealing with the authorities, you know you're going to have to deal with the corruption that goes with it. It's there.
This could be one of the reasons that the victims are unwilling to press charges and accept instead to live with the injustice in silence. No official statistics exist on the number of girls involved in the sex trade. It would be impossible to conduct such a study.
Trafficking happens in the villages, but what is so difficult is to find the number. Because when you go to a village and say, has anyone ever been trafficked from here or left and never come back? And they say, oh, it's never happened in our village, but go to the village next door. And you go to the village next door and they say, it's never happened in our village, but that village you came from, it's happened there. So it's the subject no one talks about, but everybody knows happens.
It's estimated that the number of sex slaves in Cambodia is around 100,000. Around a third of them are children. Some are not more than 5 years old.
The age doesn't concern the traffickers so much. They look for the quality of the goods, in quotes, that they are working with. And if a girl is physically well developed, they will take her whatever the age. And if she's younger, so much the better.
A third party usually instigates the trafficking.
One case I heard was of a small girl about 12 years old, where mother took her to an uncle, and this uncle took her to a house that was isolated, and he tied her up and he raped her, serially raped her day in, day out for a number of weeks, and then eventually let her go. But of course, after all this had happened, there was only one choice for her to go, and that was to end up in a brothel.
The girls are often very young when they are sold into slavery and prostitution. This horrible existence is usually a short one.
They can vary. I mean, I can take you to a place where you can find girls as young as 8 and 9 and 10, but probably the majority start between 12 to 16, and by the time they're 18, 19, 20, they would be finished.
Within 10 years, they probably died of AIDS. That's how quickly they can contract the disease and die from it. By the time they're 22, 23 years old, they're dead. If you've been, serving 10 or 15 men a day, you're worn out anyway. 10 years in that sort of trade and you're really good for nothing. If AIDS doesn't get you, something else will.
You don't have to look for long to find child prostitution. The capital, Phnom Penh, has many districts where people are offered sexual services from children. Equipped with a hidden camera, we play the part of someone looking to buy time with a child. The brothels are rusty shacks made of corrugated iron. There the girls are kept behind lock and key and are made to serve as many as 20 men a day.
Sorry? Yum yum. Yum yum. How much?
This one you like? This one you like?
Give her how much?
For you,
Just one for one. How much?
I have room more, one more.
Yes. But for her? Yum yum, how much?
100.
100. Then boom boom? Boom
No,
boom.
no have.
No have.
Boom boom have too much.
Have
Too much money.
too much money? How much?
200.
Whoosh.
Yeah.
How old? Tonight? 10? I think maybe don't be at least. Hey, you may be 12 or 13, not 10.
No,
Hmm?
you like?
Hmm.
You like?
How much? How much?
Okay, one here.
How much?
100.
Same here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of the girls have their faces painted white like dolls. This is deliberately done to show that they are for sale. The girls are sold for tiny amounts of money.
Okay, I'll give you some costs, some facts and figures. If you're a Cambodian and you have sex with a girl, especially the ones that are in the very low end, 10,000 real or $2.50 is what you'll pay for sex. If you're a foreigner, for a short time it would be $5. All night, $20 up. For a Khmer, all night, $10 up.
A girl's virginity is very sought after by Cambodian men. It is also for sale.
Virginity runs at around about $1,000, and that's usually for a week. You can keep them. So, as you can see, sex is very, very cheap. and it's too cheap.
After a girl has lost her virginity, she's worthless to single men. A future wife has to be a virgin. Of fear of humiliation, many of the girls find it hard to admit that they have been raped.
I've seen a lot of girls that have done a lot of damage to themselves, which have been a sign of self-hate, and many girls end up committing suicide.
There is more for sale than sex and virginity of young girls. Children are also sold as slaves for labor.
In most cases, only a few $100. These families are very poor, so if they're getting a couple of $100, it is like as much money as they would have in a year. So they think it's a huge amount. But then, for instance, if that girl's a virgin, she's being sold for $1,000 plus. So most of the time, where payment is made for a girl at the community level, it's extremely cheap.
Rotha is the victim of a slave trade. She has endured a lot of misery and been sold many times. For a long time, she was the property of a man who used her for sex. He held her captive and repeatedly raped her. The first time Rotha was sold, she was a virgin. She was 13 years old when she lost her virginity. For the last few years, Rotha has been working as a street prostitute for her boss, who gives her food and a place to sleep. She works in a park in the capital, which is known to be frequented by prostitutes and men looking for their services. Rotha meets her customers in the park and takes them to a shabby motel nearby. The last time Rotha was sold, it was for $300. She had just recently given birth to a child, so consequently her value had dropped. Her sale took place in a nightclub in the capital. The place is known to offer prostitution. Similar places are all over the city, and they advertise in tourist brochures such as this one. It varies how many customers Rotha sees per day. Sometimes 1, sometimes 2. Most of the time it's around 5.
That happens quite often to prostitutes here. It's very well known in this culture, is that groups of guys, large 10, 15, 20 guys, will get together and send somebody out on a motorbike to get a prostitute, and they would take her back to a hotel room, and then these 10, 15, 20 guys would just rape her all night and often pay her almost nothing.
ta đọc về đó test nè chú cá miền pram nè cha bây thay bị chua test nè chắc ngày muốn kim từ bây thay cái tha tới do xảy tới bay nè nè cái tha tầm nè sao từ đó xây 9 nè pro 9 nè pro 9nè xây tầm nè
And it has a word here. It's called bok, which I'm sorry I don't speak well Khmer. It's probably not said the right way. But it's commonly known, and it's in this society, it's seen as a way of building mateship amongst the men, building camaraderie. We're all guys in this together. And at least 1 in every 2 street prostitutes will tell you that this has happened to her at least once, and it's the experience she most fears as she lives on the streets.
Nhưng ta tầm nè là bệt đó nhưng bạc phía tới khơi mình tràn nhưng phơi ta nhưng mà đang thơm mấy bậc chập dừng chúng ta cái pram đạp riêng ta pram đạp riêng miền tập tài cái tiền nước chợ nhưng mà thanh ấy nó nhưng bùn thay nhưng thừa sành trắng cái do nhưng tay chúng nuôi thay cái hao nhưng tới miền cầm xong cái tiền cái
She says he's often beaten and abused under these circumstances. Rotha says that some of her friends have been injected with drugs if they disobeyed their bosses or the customers. They then pass out and lose consciousness while the customers has their way with them.
Nhâm trong ban nhâm pong luôn ai mà nhâm pong thay nhâm trong ban tật te nói nhâm trong ban te hay cả ai nhâm trong ban tật te lại nên nhâm miệng đấy tập ban nó nhâm thay nhâm từng khâm tay chừng ao sự khâm ấy vì môn nhưng từng khâm tha khi nhâm đồng plak bắt đầu nè.
Girls who live in the remote villages in the countryside are the most vulnerable to the trafficking and the most common victims. Saairah is one of them. Despite her young age, she has experienced many tragedies. But Saairah is one of the fortunate ones. She's one of the few girls who have been liberated from the claws of the sex trade. When she was 14, she went into the hands of a trafficker, a sale that was facilitated by her grandmother. He took her with him to Thailand, where he repeatedly raped her and violated her. He tied her down and told her the police would arrest her if she told anyone. For months on end, Saairah was this man's sexual slave. He locked her in a room at a motel and didn't let her out.
Còn ai nhom từng ngụt tắc nhom có từng ngụt tắc tới về nhom chanh mà bên tới nhom ngụt đai từng sợ có thà ngụt đai từng sợ tới bạ đê chứ hay toàn nhom đê lụa sân bàn kê chập đám chập lốp nhom đàm mình ròn tha sọc đai ở trong về bát đê tai thơm mấy bò bên chân hay.
Paralyzed with fear and despair, she kept her mouth shut and didn't tell anyone what was going on. Saairah attempted to escape many times, but the man always managed to catch her and beat her to submission.
Say to the game, we got him road at I road. Nhom nơi mùi có ăn miên là nà cốt hay nam môi nhưng mà ban giờ lạnh cốt tiền.
Finally, Saairah managed to escape.
Đây có đệt bát thấy mình có bị đột ngột đàn.
She found a taxi and was driven to the police station. After that, she was found a place in the rehabilitation center in Phnom Penh. girl's story is just one of thousands. We travelled with Sanya to the village where she grew up. The village lies in the northern region of Cambodia. It's small, remote, and very few people live there. It's typical for the type of village the traffickers target in order to enslave young children into sex and labour. Once the traffickers get their hands on them, they are bought and sold between regions or over the border. Sanya's father lives in a small hut in the village with his family. Her friends are happy to see her. However, Sanya's father completely disregards her, although he's seeing her for the first time for many months. His contempt for her is overbearing. He is controversial among the villagers and has both alcoholic and gambling problems. Gambling is a very popular pastime in Cambodia.
They will gamble on anything, you know, even if it's a cockroach race or something like that, you know, seeing which cockroach is going to win. It's just something they do. And I suppose it's entertainment. There's nothing else for them to do in the evening, or very little to do.
For a time, Sanya's father was a village leader, but he lost his post because of irregularities.
Those gambling debts go for a certain amount of time until the neighbour turns around and says, hey, come on, I want my money. What do they have to give? That's when their children turn into commodities. When you're on $1 or $2 a day, and you suddenly find your 14-year-old girl can be sold for $1,000, that's nearly 3 years' salary. That's an enormous amount of money in the context of what they're living in.
In the hut where Sanya's father lives, everyone sleeps together in one room. The hammock is the only piece of furniture excluding the bed. The toilet facilities are behind the hut. Sanya's father has several wives today. Her mother disappeared soon after she was born and hasn't been seen since. Her father admits he hasn't spent a lot of time with his daughter in the past. He says he tried searching for his daughter for a few months before giving up. We asked Sanya's father if he would do things differently given another chance. Their neighbour says she's watched Sanya and her family since she was a baby. She says she does not know what happened to Sanya after she disappeared from the village.
cả việc tàu trên từ Thái nữa à ọt bản đừng tơ việc bạc chập sang cùng rồi xa mấy việc tàu luôn ai anh việt nữa nhưng mà đừng thà bạc đường ấy tê mình đừng thà cái vô khơi bệnh cho ngày phục sinh giá nênเป็นสัญญามันเอานึงคือถ้ากัดมันแจกกรอบกรองประดับดาวโกนเต้กัดกึดตะปีเล่งถ้ากากว่าคำแจกดาวโกนใหญ่ๆมองได้
When a person is paying debts, they will use anything they can to make those debts. As you say, whether it's corn or chicken or children, it's there. And they say, okay, you could have my daughter. I will let you have her, for $50, $100, $300. And so that child is then taken from her original home and placed in a neighbour's home. That neighbour might get into debt. So that child will be sold on again because she's somebody else's child originally, not their child. So that child has been sold once, can be sold again and again and again. Then they have to turn around and say, well, now, how can I make more money out of this girl? And the easiest thing to do is to get her into prostitution. And before she knows it, she's serving 10, 15, 20 men a day.
Some of the girls in Sania's village have been taught to avoid the types of men that deal in trafficking.
ហើយនឹងដែលថាមនុស្សផ្លាច់ហើយមកនៅភូមិយើងហ្នឹងថាយើងមិនស្គាល់យើងមិនត្រូវនៅចិត្តគេទេព្រោះខ្លាចគេចាប់យើងទៅធ្វើជាស្រីខូចស្រីអីហ្នឹងត្រូវកិច្ចឲ្យឆ្ងាយពីគេយើងមិនត្រូវនៅចិត្តគេទេ
Some of the kidnappers use drugs to run to the children unconscious before they abduct them.
មានតែខ្ញុំឮតែគេនិយាយគេថាគេផ្ទះស្មាយើងហើយយើងស្លាប់ក៏គេយកយើងទៅលក់ទៅអីទៅហើយយើងអត់ដឹងខ្លួនទេគឺគេមានថ្នាំដាក់នៅដៃហើយគេមកវាយស្មាយើងទៅវាថាវាជ្រាបចូលទៅយើងក៏ទន់ខ្លួនស្លាប់ទៅ
But what about the parents? Don't they try to get their children back after they've gone missing?
Obviously those that have sold them don't. But those that have had them kidnapped or tricked, they try very hard, very, very hard. It's so painful when you see them. And you see them trying because most of the time they never find them.
These tragic circumstances are foreign to us, but leave lasting impressions on those who try and seek answers. What can be done to prevent this from going on? Many relief organizations are working in Cambodia. They deal with the problems with their tireless efforts which are driven by care, the passion to improve people's lives. In the rehabilitation center where Sania lives, there are 50 girls who have been through the trauma of sexual slavery and violence. For security reasons, no cameras are allowed in the center, but a few of them are operating in the city. All of the girls staying there have a similar background of abduction and violence like Sania. Some of them are even worse.
And that's why for us, we are really focusing on trafficking prevention. We have to stop it.
Part of the rehabilitation takes place in the jungle, where the girls stay for 1 week at a time.
ជាទូទៅនៅចំណុចចាប់ដើមនៃគេមកគឺគេអត់សូវមានទំនុកទឹកចិត្តខ្លួនឯងផ្លាស់ប្ដូរទម្លាប់ចាស់ឧទាហរណ៍ដូចជាតងយៈគឺមើលថាសកម្មភាពមួយហ្នឹងគឺភ័យមែនតើប៉ុន្តែអាចបង្រៀនឲ្យគាត់បោះបង់ការភ័យខ្លាចចោលហើយបោះបង់អាទម្លាប់ដែលគាត់គិតថាមិនអាចធ្វើបាននៅថ្ងៃនេះគឺគាត់អាចធ្វើបាន
The
Saairah had been in rehabilitation for more than 6 months before she dared to speak of what she had been through.
Because once somebody has gone through that kind of trauma, it is a huge process to bring them back where they can start to function again in society, and often society then doesn't even accept them.
Saairah was afraid and ashamed of herself. But now she's grown stronger. She gets love and care from the instructors and her friends in the rehabilitation centre. She's learned to read and write. The girls are also taught English and how to use computers. The key to fighting trafficking is prevention. The volunteers of the relief organisations go from village to village with drawings which illustrate the dangers of trafficking. Because of the high illiteracy rate, simple pictures are used detailing the dangers involved. The mothers are offered special classes that are getting more popular every day. The aid work is hard and selfless. Sometimes Jeff feels like he's fighting windmills.
I just heard of a very sad story recently where a girl was rescued and she went through all the milestones. Everything was going well. They thought it was fantastic, and she even got married and went back to live in a new village with her husband, and she'd been there for 2 years. And then somehow the villagers found out that she had once been a prostitute. And they started to talk amongst the village, and she got so much negative pressure, she went out and killed herself.
It is the positive examples like Saairah that keep the volunteers going. By now, Saairah is so strong that she's herself doing volunteer work, warning parents and children about the situation she found herself in.
We are seeing changes in attitude. We're seeing people think about things. Is it enough? I'm not sure. We need to change men in every country in the world so that they really become focused on living a life which relates to their family and being honest to their families. And really that's how we're going to stop the problem. But otherwise that problem is going to be anywhere where there is poverty and there are men who are willing to pay for sex.
Cambodian males are by far the biggest group that buy prostitution. Only a small section of buyers are tourists, but the media reports are almost exclusively centred on them.
Of course we need to stop the foreigners, but that's about 2 or 3%. Let's hit the other 90–95%.
Saairah is lucky to have ended up in the rehabilitation centre. If those kind of centres did not exist, many of the victims would have nowhere to go.
That place to go when you're on the run, when you're trying to get away, is essential. There has to be a place of safety. There has to be a place where the children can open up, they can talk about their problems, they can feel safe and say whatever they want to say. And this is why Cambodia really has needed the help of NGOs and the like in order to help kickstart some of these services again.
The girls often feel bad at the start of the rehabilitation. When questioned, it becomes apparent that they often feel like they've let their families down by leaving the brothels. Jeff is impressed by the resignation of the girls. One of them, who he works with, was sold by her mother for $300.
I said to her, "Do you hate your mother?" And she said, "No," she says, "we were poor, like, what was the choice?" And I think a lot of people don't really understand how these things can happen because they also don't understand the culture and how people are and how people feel and think in those cultures. So I really want people out there to really have an appreciation that this is a good culture. These are a good people, but they are very different in the ways they think. And so we have to be different sometimes in the way we work with them and the issues that we raise with them and the way we talk about things.
Like Sanya, the girls in the rehabilitation centres get stronger one step at a time. Bit by bit, they regain their confidence and self-respect. Despite nightmares and the constant fear, they live in the hope for a better life.
The hope has to be real. It has to have some foundation. And so when they begin to learn more skills, different skills, whether it's language skills, even learning English, can be a door opener to a better job.
After Sanya has finished her rehabilitation, she will be placed in a foster home where all efforts will be made to help her become happy and well-adjusted young woman. With the volunteer work, the girls are taught that rape is never justified. They are made to understand that rape and human trafficking are human rights violations. They have to know the consequences for breaking them and that they have to have the courage and conviction to report all sexual violence to the police so that the perpetrators can be brought to justice. Above all, they have to stop believing that they don't deserve to be treated decently.
And so you have to try and work around those things and work at the grassroots level so that you avoid much of the bureaucracy as possible and get the aid through to the people at the lowest level. So I think there was improvement. I think there's a lot of room for even more improvement. But I think advances are being made. And once you started helping people to help themselves, they did. They did help themselves. And that made a big difference.
Even though progress has been made, there is still a long way to go.
Yes, I think the work of NGOs in Cambodia will still have quite a long life. The country can absorb it, it's needed, and I think it's money well spent. If there is no hope, there's nothing to look forward to. And somehow we have to instill the hope of better things, a better life, a future to look forward to. Something where there isn't corruption, there isn't the profiteering, the racketing. There is something which people can look forward to, which is safe, which is sound, which creates a loving environment. That's what's lacking. And unless society can find that, then the situation isn't going to change. But once they can have something they can hold on to and say, yes, things are going to get better, we know that. We've got to work through this. I have some goals I can work towards. Then that child can see a better future ahead of them.